Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Matt Sizemore from Good Morning, Idaho. Thank you for joining us right now for this Facebook forum, this live Facebook forum at that. Of course, we're almost 3 weeks into the new year now. And if you need some ideas on how to start the new year off on the right foot and keep it that way, we have some experts here to help today. Joining me for today's forum is with Regence Executive or the Regence Executive Medical Director, Dr. Jim Polo. Doctor, thanks for being here as
Thank
always.
you. Thank you. My pleasure.
Of course. And from Optum Idaho, Senior Care Advocate Darren Bushy. Darren, thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure too, Matt.
Okay. So first question we have for you guys, and feel free to whoever wants to take it first, go ahead, and then we can switch it up potentially on the next question, or however you two want to do it. But first question for you: when we talk about resiliency, what exactly would you say resiliency means?
Want me to go first?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's funny. We lots of different ways of thinking about this, but I think the way to understand this is stress is a normal part of our lives, and resilience is about how do you handle what's going on around you? How do you cope with whatever it is that the challenge is in front of you and get through it? And to some degree, resilience is about being able to bounce back to your normal level of ability to handle stress when you're at low stress. So we all have periods of time when nothing's really bothering us and we're ready to handle anything. Something happens and we focus and respond to it. And after we've responded to it and kind of taken care of it, we get back to where we were. So resilience is about the ability to handle what's coming at you and bouncing back so that you can continue to move on to other things. That's the way I would describe it in a simple way.
Yeah, and I think a really good example of that is if you take somebody that's been in like a car wreck, even though maybe there might have not have been any injuries, there still can be some hesitation from that experience with getting back into the car and feeling confident about that mode of transportation. And I use car wrecks is because that's something everybody can sort of anchor themselves into in that example. And the resilient quality is your ability, like Dr. Polo was saying, over time. And so we want it to be over a short, moderate duration of time that we're able to adjust and cope with that stress appropriately.
Gotcha. Now, let me just kind of go off on that for a second and ask you guys a couple things, or maybe just one thing. And by the way, anybody who's watching us right now in the live stream, please feel free if you have any questions for these experts, throw them. We're going to be kind of all over the place today. But when I think resiliency, obviously resiliency, being resilient, especially self-resilient, is something that's so important during this pandemic, with so many of us not being able to go out, not wanting to go out, and just a plethora of other things. It's so hard to really bounce back. That's one of the key phrases I heard, is bounce back. But could you guys talk about, of course, like I just said, self-resiliency is very important, but the importance of having others, a support system, the importance of having others help you through your journey.
Yeah, let me see if I can start us off on that, because I think you're bringing up a point that's really important. There's a number of ways that you can certainly build resilience, okay? Developing coping strategies to be able to handle what's going on. But a key component is that internal voice that you have. It's about your confidence, your sense of esteem, your concept of self. That's a huge part of resilience, because most of the stressors that we have to deal with are external. Like right now, we're dealing with this pandemic, and the external stressor is this virus. The internal perspective, it is about how we see ourselves in a situation. Are we going to be able to handle it? What do we think our capabilities are? What's our sense of self around that? So the ability to build this inner strength is a key component of developing resilience, because ultimately the people that are able to best handle situations that are challenging is people that are willing to say to themselves, this is new, this is different. I need to change something. I need to learn something new. I may not get it right the first time, and I just got to keep applying myself. I need to be curious, and I'm going to get through this. But having that sense of confidence, that sense of self to be able to address whatever's facing in front of you is critically important.
Exactly. And I think along with that is, how do we increase our resiliency? And so I think that comes around, just increasing our self-awarenesses to our responses to stressors. And one of the things that we do know is that people who are resilient have that self-awareness factor, right? That they're aware of their emotional reactions and how they're responding to it in the moment. And they're taking an inventory of those behaviors that are around them. And then obviously trying to cultivate that into a point where they can maybe have a positive outlook, which, when you're feeling restricted as a result of the pandemic, that can have a negative outlook on things. So you're attempting to take control of things that you might not have absolute control over, but you want to influence it. And like Dr. Polo was saying, it all starts internally with that conversation with self.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think something that Darren highlighted, which is critical, is that we all have different triggers that create a sense of, stress for us. And you have to be attuned to what your triggers are. So if you can learn what are those things that I feel when I know I'm under stress, when I'm starting to feel pressured that are unique to me, and get in tune with knowing what your own triggers are so you can say, okay, I'm under stress. Now, what do I need to do that I'm sensing those triggers are affecting me?
Great point there. Yeah, some of the people that have handled the pandemic the best, I've heard things from them in terms of like how much self reflection they've done, getting to know themselves. Those are the people that seem to be getting through this the easiest because they know how to, like you just said, handle these things. They know what triggers them, so they can either avoid these things or learn how to overcome these things. So. All great points, guys. Thanks very much. Now, on that note, though, of the pandemic, despite vaccines, boosters being out, things that are really, really helping out the people that are using these, we're still very much in the middle of this pandemic. Obviously, it's incredibly exhausting to say the least. So, with that being said, how do we manage our expectations and our goals during this time, knowing that for the ones who are taking it seriously, for the ones who are being responsible, still not going out, still not going to bars, restaurants, making sure that they can't spread anything to their friends, family, community. How do we control those expectations and goals?
Darren, you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the same principles apply to goal setting prior to the pandemic as well as being in a pandemic. And some of those things are down. You want to write down your own goals. You want to visually see them. You want to create an action plan. You want to be able to monitor your progress and how you're achieving your goals and building a support system, right? And on and on and on. And so, the goal itself, the aim is an action. And so I think those are the same tenements that still exist with that. Now, when you put a pandemic into it, you have to take that into inventory. So we have these restrictions that are being taken place that involve our lives and such. And we can be hampered by those. But, it's important to always monitor your motivation to fulfill your goals. And sometimes you have to go back and rekindle them from time to time, despite these barriers that are there. We're at the beginning of the year. And so obviously you come into resolutions, people are making these particular goals for themselves and whatnot. And so it's, difficult to see that through sometimes because of barriers that we self-impose. And, eating it as an example, or diet or exercise can be an example of those things. So we impose some of those self-barriers. It's a natural tendency, but we have to keep ourselves motivated. What is the prize that we have in hand that we want to go for? With the pandemic, that's something very interesting. It's an external barrier, right? So nobody wished that upon us, and certainly not ourselves, but we nonetheless have to rekindle our motivation and not lose sight of our goal and what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Darren has said. And the idea of having an action plan is critically important, because when you're handling stress, it ultimately comes down to how do you problem solve? How do you deal with a situation where you're not sure what to do? and you want to work through it so that you can get to a solution. So part of the key is, rather than focusing on the problem, focusing on the solution. Okay, that's the first thing that's key. And the only way that you can do that is you have to have an action plan. Now, the question though was, how do you manage expectations? How do you manage goals? And I think one of the key things is you've got to think very carefully about what are reasonable expectations that are within your sphere of control. So for example, we're talking about the pandemic. I don't control the rules about when to mask or when not to mask. I mean, obviously I control my ability to follow the rules, but I don't actually control the rules. So if I wanted to set expectations that we're no longer going to mask up in March, that's not a reasonable goal because I don't have the ability to control that. So I think one of the challenges with this is people need to actually become aware of what's accurate around them. What are the facts of the situation that you do know? And you need to recognize up front, there's a lot of things we don't know. And then within your sphere of what's stressing you, what are the things that you do control that you can focus on, that you can develop an action plan, and then move forward? And you have to be comfortable, unfortunately, you have to be comfortable knowing there may be some things you don't control. And by default, there may be some things that you would like to see some things happen, but you can't expect it because you don't actually have the ability to manage that.
Gotcha. Yeah, great points there, all around from everyone, and great segue also because a lot of the stuff that we are feeling, a lot of the stuff, or I should say, a lot of the reasons we're still in the pandemic is because of social media related things, misinformation that's happening. It's so easy to feed into negativity. It's so easy for people to make misinformation, wrong information, completely incorrect things look legitimate and real. So whether we're talking about social media or in terms of negativity and toxicity, in terms of looking at social media, maybe even our own friend groups, what are some ways to avoid all this negativity, or at least let it go and move on if possible? And let me just give you one example. I know a lot of people who could, on social media, if they post something, whatever it is, and especially, in the broadcast industry, with people that are seen by thousands of people every day, they can get 100, 200, 300 compliments. But if they see one negative comment, that is what's going to stick with them for a while. A lot of people, but that goes back to resiliency. But in this question here, what are some ways to avoid feeling that, to avoid not seeing those, but, letting go of those if possible?
I'll just highlight, there's a saying, misery loves company. For whatever reason, humans thrive on events that are negative, in the sense that they focus on them. They kind of end up creating a life of their own in such a way that it becomes all consuming. Okay. Think of a disaster that happens in a local region. A building burns down to the ground and a bunch of people are hurt. Everybody wants to read about that. They want to know what happened, why happened, who got hurt, how many got hurt. It becomes just this focus that people gravitate to because it's partly out of curiosity. Okay. Whereas I could, publish a story about something great that happened and nobody would want to read it because, there's no conflict in that. There's no unknowns in that. It's just something that's good. And the problem with this pandemic is it's huge. It's everywhere. And it's become all consuming in all facets of our life. And so it's like the du jour issue that everybody wants to talk about. And unfortunately, because of social media, huge open social arena for folks to talk. Some of that information is not so accurate. Some of that information is sometimes distorted. Something that is bad can sometimes appear to be much worse than it really is from a scale perspective. So, the way I have been kind of recommending folks think about it is, hey, look, you only need about 5 or 10 minutes a day to review the news and understand what's new and relevant relative to the pandemic. If you're spending 5 hours reading all about the latest hospital that had the latest numbers of the increases or what, you're just throwing yourself right into that very same pit of despair and spending way too much time focusing on it. And that all by itself creates a tremendous amount of stress. So you've got to be able to kind of set that aside and go to the other things that are part of life.
Yeah, that's a powerful statement there. From the viewer's perspective, they need to determine what's newsworthy. And so just because it's being broadcasted, they determine whether they're wanting to focus their energy on it. So, you have to direct the negative energy away from you. And this can be accomplished by just detaching from sources that cultivate negative energy that isn't even ours. Because it's being broadcasted, we take that in and we internalize it. So just taking inventory of that can be a really big step. I like to replace negative self-defeating behaviors with positive ones.
Yes.
And so the only good way to do that is to replace it with a good new habit, as opposed to just stopping one. And so I think that's the road source going forward. But even before you get there, you have to raise your self-awareness that this is even a thing for you, right? Like you got this negative energy in your life. You can be encapsulated with negative energy and not your awareness factor not be high enough to understand that that's what's going on. You're just reacting. And so, you have to raise your awareness of that. And then the negative thoughts drive the negative behaviors. So if I'm thinking about this all the time, this ruminating a negative thought, of course, my actions are going to come out negatively. So this is where I like our support system, especially our families and our friends. There are great barometer checks because they're going to tell us what we don't see, right? And so if we're honest with ourselves, we have to solicit that feedback from them in a way that they feel safe to give it to us, because sometimes they'll think it and not give it, right? And so we want to put them in a place where we can actually learn from that, because that is the best source that we can get. And just doing that can be a really big step for somebody. That's hard, it's risky.
Darren said something I want to just elaborate on because it's so critically important. As a psychiatrist, I spend my life helping people reframe things in their mind. We have a way of looking at a situation and seeing it sometimes only in one way. And what I'm speaking to is the idea of, remember, in the middle of things that are going on that are very bad, you can always find positive things. And if you can simply shift your thinking sometimes to focus more on the positive, you can develop a sense of optimism, which is a force multiplier, to really look at things differently in such a way that you can get through times of adversity. So I give you a very simple example. I'm a child psychiatrist, and I've got a ton of parents that, it's terrible. My kids can't go to school and they're at home and I can't control them, blah, 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 blah. And this is miserable. And it's like, have you ever thought about how much time you're getting to spend with your kids that you wouldn't have had because they're out of sight, out of mind at school, and you get to actually be with them and spend time with them? Because, I know as an adult, as a grandparent now, I love spending time with my grandkids, but I didn't figure that out until much later when I didn't have the opportunity anymore. So if you just reframe how you look at things, sometimes you can see the positive in the middle of something that seems negative.
A great point there. Yeah, I'm with you there. I completely understand. I have a 1.5-year-old and always here. Always here. And love her to pieces. Sometimes I think, I just want to break. But then I try to think, like you're saying, one day she's going to be going off to daycare. She's going to be going off to kindergarten. I'm not going to see her as much. So yeah, we got to love the time that we do have with them. I wanted to mention one other thing, kind of on the mental health aspect of this. And this might just be a theory, but please just tell me what you think about this. When I think about the pandemic and maybe people being toxic or acting toxic, I would think that a lot of that has to do with potentially people, for lack of a better phrase, just forgetting how to talk to others. Because we don't see people that much, or many of us don't. I know that a lot of people are getting out still, but I'll even find myself now, because I've done most of my interviews over the past 2 years through Zoom and it's not the same, obviously. So every so often now, if I go somewhere to an interview, or if I go to a supermarket, when it first opens, rare cases where I'm still doing things, I feel like I've really lost a big part of who I was, which was the ability to easily talk to anybody about anything. Now it seems almost kind of awkward. I can see how some people might not know how to handle this and might start to become agitated, or something like that. How much would you say this pandemic is causing these people to develop these new negative feelings, or negative not outbursts, but you know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I've talked to several educators, and what they're noticing after being absent out of the classroom around that social engagement component, that they're having to come back and relearn that. And so typically where the child should be acting at this particular age, they're not. They're acting more or less maybe a year or two behind. And it's that social component and being disengaged. So if you really think about it, we come into the world connected physically with an umbilical cord, right? And the first thing they do is they cut that umbilical cord. I come from the premise that we always try to make connections in life. And this is a very real thing, Matt. So your perception is very high. It's absolutely real. And so that's the thing that we have to start to address now, is how do we come back into community? And that means, how do we socially engage one another, and how do we support one another? And these are skill sets. This is learned behavior, and it can become stronger. But I think there is certainly something going on, and it's very real what you're talking about.
Yeah, Matt, your question is a super one, because I think it's a lot bigger than just the pandemic. And what I mean by that is that I agree with Darren. We thrive on connecting to other people. We come into this world, we get exposed to what's around us, and we try to belong. We try to connect with people. We try to belong to a group. We thrive on relationships. Now, prior to the pandemic, social media was already changing the nature of how we connect to people. You talk about the mythical family that goes out to dinner and they're all on their phones, and they're all like connecting in a total different way that for me as a child was not possible. Okay. So this idea of how do we connect and how do we relate to others, it is a lot bigger than just the pandemic. It's about, how do you understand socially where you fit in? And what are the mores, the rules, the cueing that allows you to do that in a way that develops good, healthy relationships? And one of the challenges is that we're in the middle of a pandemic, which creates all kinds of stress. And we're seeing incidents. In fact, you can read about it in the paper just about every day, things that you wouldn't have thought would be possible. For example, on airlines, there have been several stories in the media where passengers have actually attacked and hit a steward because, quote, they were told to put a mask on. Okay. Kind of seems like a little bit overboard response, overboard. And yet the flight gets grounded. The person gets arrested. We're seeing the same thing happen in hospitals, emergency rooms. So people are very stressed. They're reacting in the moment, on top of the fact that we're living in a world that's changing what's appropriate social interaction, what's acceptable. So I think we're going to be struggling with this a lot more than just as a result of the pandemic, particularly since a lot of things that we're learning to do right now, for example, Zoom conferencing and so forth, that's not going to evaporate even when things settle down with the current endemic. And I say endemic because we're no longer in a pandemic. The reality is it's endemic. It's here to stay. It's going to be here to stay.
Yeah, I gotcha. Great points, especially thinking about what social media has done to the world even before the pandemic. I mean, you just think, oh, well, I'll just text them. I'll just message them, as opposed to let me call somebody. So very good points there. Now, another point you just brought up, Dr. Polo, is healthcare workers and the things they've had to see. Mentally exhausted, negativity is hitting them directly, just so on a daily basis. And these are people who, of course, are championed very early on in the pandemic. They know how to handle this. Of course, it's been a huge learning lesson for everybody, doctors, nurses, everybody, including them, as this is a brand new thing. But what can we do these days? We're 2 years in, just to show support to these healthcare workers who we can't say enough about, who have been going through more than any of us who are not in healthcare even know about.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for that question, because that's an important question for all of us to be thinking about. People that go into healthcare generally are driven into healthcare because there's something about helping other people that drives them. It gives them meaning. It gives them purpose. Okay. And I would highlight that it's been my experience that the grand majority of the people in the population recognize and appreciate healthcare workers, caregivers, that they appreciate that. But we're in a situation right now where the stress on our system has gone on for quite some time, and people are exhausted and people are burning out. Okay. I have myself been in situations where I have felt exhausted and burned out related to healthcare. It's the small things sometimes that make a difference. It's the taking the time to thank somebody genuinely in the moment goes a long way to a healthcare giver. I can remember many times when a family member has pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Dr. Polo, I just want to let you know you've been wonderful with my young son for the last 3 months, and I just wanted to let you know I really, really appreciate everything you've done to help him get through this struggle. It's made the world of difference to me and my family." That kind of a comment, oh my gosh, that's the kind of a comment that really makes you feel like, okay, I was on the right track, what I was doing. Now, in terms of what can the public do, okay, it's very important to engage in your local community. If people are out there saying, what can I do in my own community? Who are the workers in your community that are making a difference? And it's not just healthcare workers. It can be the fire department. It can be the police officers that are helping get folks to and from hospitals, but calling them up and saying, "Hey, I know you guys are really stressed. Is there something you need, something I can do for you?" My son's a fireman. And he says every week somebody will drop by the fire station and say, "Hey, my wife made a plate of cookies. We thought we'd drop them off because we know you guys are working hard. We assume you would love." They love it. They absolutely love it.
Awesome.
So it's making that connection in the moment to demonstrate genuine thankfulness goes a long way. That's one of the most important things I think that the public should be sensitive to.
That can't be underscored enough. I think it's the gratitude, the appreciation, extending ourselves in good faith. Simple acts are sometimes the best. And if you know somebody personally in the healthcare field, you can come up with creative ways. The sky's the limit on that one. Probably the most effective message to offer is the promotion of self-care. A neighbor of mine, he's a physician assistant, he works in the ER, and he takes care of himself. And I applaud that. I make sure I let him know that I applaud that. My sister is a nurse practitioner, and I'm always promoting that with her. And there's a sense of gratitude, and she fulfills that. She does. She goes out and she takes care of herself. And so, we have to take care of our instruments, both our mind and our body. And as obvious as that might sound, it needs to be broadcasted more because the burnout is very real and it's out there, and we need to combat it.
Awesome. Great points, everybody. And of course, like you said, just small things, a little compliment, a call, a card, something, just, let these healthcare workers know they are appreciated, and it could, like you said, go a long way. I know we're starting to run out of time, so just a couple more questions for you guys. Let me ask you about, let's go back to resiliency for a second. We all make, not we all, but many of us, you know what? I'm almost going to say we all make resolutions, but I'd love to know the percentage of people who are able to follow up with those. So, with that being said, what would you say are some ways to make any resolutions or goals that we make at the beginning of the year last all year long, as opposed to a couple months, a couple weeks, or even a couple days in some cases?
I love this question because it reminds me. I'm a fairly focused person when it comes to my own physical health. I go to the gym, 5 times a week, and every January, the gym is packed with a ton of people. And by February, things are back to normal. But it's a real kind of revelation in terms of how we sometimes think of things. So this idea of creating a resolution. Well, how do you actually get there? So there's a couple things that I would recommend. First of all, when you form a resolution to do something, almost always it's something that you want to change. Hey, I'm going to lose weight. Hey, I'm going to get in shape. Hey, I'm going to, get better at this activity, whatever. You've got to have a plan. You've got to have a plan that slowly gets you where you want to be. And then you have to be tracking yourself along the way. And it's okay if sometimes you make a few mistakes. And it's okay if you don't always hit the target. So for example, common resolution, New Year's resolution, I'm going to lose 30 pounds. And that's all the thought that goes into the resolution. There's no plan about it. Well, if you're going to lose 30 pounds, what are you going to do? Okay, I'm going to exercise more. I'm going to maybe eat better nutrition. And perhaps I'm going to be doing some other things that kind of keep myself physically active. So what are those? How can you plan those out? And if you say you're going to lose 30 pounds, what's your target? 30 pounds in a year, 30 pounds in 3 months? Because if you say you're going to lose 30 pounds in 1 week, that's just not a realistic target. No plan is going to get you there. So it's about setting a resolution and creating a plan that slowly gets you there, and then measuring your progress along the way. So that's my advice. And I think that's very, very applicable to this pandemic. What are the things that people feel they're struggling with the most that they would like to achieve? And how can you create an action plan, kind of like Darren talked about earlier? How can you create an action plan for yourself that slowly gets you to where you want to be?
If you really think about it, slow incremental change is better than drastic change. And when you're looking for the long haul, that's what you want to really progress monitor, as Dr. Polo was saying. Resiliency is both an attitude and a skill. You simply have to ask yourself, am I building my resiliency, right? And if you answer it in either way, the other question is, how am I not becoming more resilient with my attitude? And after noticing changes in your behavior, the other question is am I moving in a direction that I want that's more healthy for me? So the one component, we said this earlier in the conversation, especially with resolutions and goal setting, is the relationship that's tied to that. When that relationship is meaningful, especially when we're making connections with others, if we're wanting to support somebody in our life or loved ones with a goal that they lean into that relationship component. And so that's the good measure for you. And I'm always asking people to work easier, work less. You want to strive for these goals, but you want to use your resources and lean into them appropriately, because that's where you're going to get most bang for your buck.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And if there's anything I'd recommend to everybody, and maybe just another word to add to what you both were saying, it's the ability to have patience. Because I feel like in this society, specifically American society, we all want immediate results. That's one of the biggest problems with weight loss, is people want to see it right away. They work out 3 days and say, why am I not ripped? And
and if you think about it, resolutions usually are about being able to go through being uncomfortable. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable, because you're going to change something, and it's okay sometimes to fail. We sometimes are so hard on ourselves because we didn't, do something we said we wanted to do. And the reality is maybe you were just learning how to do whatever that activity was. If you think about it, athletes are born with raw talent. They spend an enormous amount of time refining that raw talent so that they can actually perform. And they go through a lot of failure before they finally win the prize. And so really it's about being comfortable with being uncomfortable, curious enough to learn, curious enough to push yourself and try new things. And it's okay when it doesn't always work out the first time around.
Yeah. And that right there is a great segue to our last question here. You're talking about professional athletes. Yes, they're born with raw talent. Yes, they grow up maybe playing sports. But but then we see, if I don't know, say NFL, we see them play on Sundays. We rarely see what they're doing every other day of the week, and they are putting in ridiculous amounts of work because it's their job. If all of our jobs were to be professionally in shape, that'd be great, but it's not, unfortunately. But with all that being said, you had also mentioned being, unfortunately, a lot of people are self-critical because we don't see those results right away. It's easy to just look down on ourselves. So when it comes to self-image and self-worth, what are some good ways for us to learn to be less critical of ourselves?
Yeah, one of the things I tell people quite often is that we walk around and we have this proverbial coach and critic, and one sits on the shoulder opposite of the other, and they talk into our ear. And I'm always trying to promote the coach because the critic screams loudly, and that's what we listen to. It's like you were saying earlier, Matt, about that one negative comment. That's the one thing I listen to, right? And that's the thing that stays with me. And so what we're trying to teach people is to raise the coach up. Let the coach start leaning into your ear, telling you what you're doing right, and minimize the critic. And you have to balance that out. But typically, all too often, the critic is screaming with this megaphone in your ear. And so you have to raise a level of awareness to that and then start to level that conversation out. And obviously what we're talking about, the conversation that's going on in your head.
Yeah, Darren is exactly right. We all live our lives with this voice in our head that only we hear. And it is constantly monitoring everything we do. And, I often share with parents when I'm trying to help them with their children is to be very patient with kids and to early on be a coach, allow them to make mistakes, reinforce the idea that you're separating the difference between who they are and what they do. Let me tell you what I really mean by that. So, the young kid that maybe perhaps doesn't play ball as well as somebody else maybe begins to see himself as somehow less than the other kid. Okay. And really the difference between those two kids is the capability to perform in that sport. But each kid individually is as important as the other one. And separating those two becomes critically important. So we live our lives trying to measure up to what we think other people will think of us. And by default, trying to measure up what we think about ourselves. So you need to give yourself a break. You need to change that voice in your head to be a positive voice as opposed to a negative voice. So let's say that you're approaching something that you've never done before, and that voice in your head says, "Oh my God, you've never done this. You're going to fail. Don't try. No, you're going to make a fool of yourself. Don't do that. You've got to change that voice to be a different voice that's saying, hey, this looks kind of fun. You've never done this before. Well, I wonder if we try it this way. It might not work the first time, but that's okay. We'll have fun doing it. So it's about how you change that running commentary in your head to be more positive, more curious, be willing to learn and uncomfortable with not knowing something in such a way that you're willing to try stuff. And by default, you begin to feel more confident about yourself in situations where you're uncomfortable.
Being your own motivational speaker and best friend. That's a good way to see it. Perfect. All right, gentlemen. Well, we are just about out of time. So with that being said, is there anything else that, as we're still, I guess we're January 19th already. How'd that happen? Still, we're near the beginning of the year. Is there anything else you want to just get in there for everybody to know as we hope to finally have a good year for the first time in 2 years, really?
Well, I guess the thing that I would highlight is regardless of all the negativity that we're reading about, and regardless of all the stuff that's, telling us how difficult the situation that we're in relative to the pandemic actually is, we are getting through it.
Yeah.
Is it over? No. Are things going to be exactly the way they were before? No. Things are actually going to be better. We just haven't figured that out yet. Okay. So it's important to remember it's not a race to get through something. It's about enjoying your journey through whatever it is that you're doing. And for us right now, we're going through a pandemic. Societies have done this before, not in our lifetime, but prior to our lifetime they have, and they made it through. We will too.
Absolutely. And just to highlight that, just to rekindle your motivation throughout the year, keep your goals in sight. And if you feel like you're wavering, lean into your support system. And, a good takeaway is that there's a wonderful mental health professional community out there that can help you along the way. Doesn't mean it's forever. It can be very short-lived in your visitations, but I think reaching out to your resources and utilizing those is a really good solution.
All right. Great advice, guys. Thanks so much. Joining me today for this wonderful forum has been Regence Executive Medical Director, Dr. Jim Polo, and Optum Idaho Senior Care Advocate, Darren Bushy. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today and the wonderful advice you've given us all.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much.